so you have to deploy it in an odd way. Don't do add VApp from catalog because that's not going to work for some reason. You need to go to catalogs in this tab here. Then you need to click on the VApp templates tab and then search for Juniper. And you should see defsec_juniper_lab. That's a VApp template. You want to right click on that and add to my cloud. And then you can deploy it like you normally would.
Probably show up for the HTML5 as well. I don't know either.
It'd be interesting if it actually works for the HTML5.
Maybe it does work for the HTML5. Maybe there's no problem for the HTML5. You know, if it just had functionality, I would totally use the HTML5.
We're being forced to use HTML5 because they're breaking the Flash.
Is it, yeah, the solution? That's how we.
Is this how you do it? New VApp? No.
Yep. I actually just got catalogs. You probably have to do the same way, actually.
Libraries? Okay.
Catalogs, bottom left.
No, it's VApp templates. I can just search through here, right?
What?
Supposedly I should be able to search from here, right?
No, you can't search from there. What are you talking about? HTML5 doesn't have search bars.
Oh, maybe I can.
No,
Ooh,
that
there it
doesn't.
is. Come on.
Does that work?
I think it does.
What is it? What is that symbol?
It's filter. Gotta learn Excel.
Yeah, yours is showing up there. It looks like it doesn't actually work. And then just three buttons probably. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Three lines, create VApp.
Oh, okay. Is that what? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically the same process as going through the
It's
Flash now.
exactly the same process, just weirder. But you're right. That's not good because if mine's slow now. So how long did yours take to create?
I don't know if it's done yet. It's still running.
Well, you're still copying, but
No, I got two things running right now. One of them is the deploy.
wait, when did you make that one?
I don't know, like 5:45-ish.
Oh. Because you realize, like, if that's how long it takes to make one of them, everyone's get, like, there's gonna be like at least another 10, 15, right?
Yep. Are you guys jumping right into the lab, or are you going to talk about stuff first? Are you guys going to jump into the lab?
Yes, the first semester. Sure you do. Once again, I'm always amused how, like, no one sits in any of that space. Everyone wants to be as far from percentage as possible. It does make me wonder, like, if we had, if this was like a full, like, amphitheater, like, if they just kept going back, like, how far would people sit back? Like, if we had a thing up there, and just went like this back again, like, how far? If this was too high, I bet there's one person's like top right corner.
Yeah, that's it. At least one. Yeah.
What's the VF?
_Juniper SRX. Oh, sorry. _lab.
Okay. The only reason is because
Okay.
so this is why we gotta push it.
All right, welcome everybody to the spring semester of Defensive Security Club. Fill out the attendance link so that we can push out VApps to you in the future. All right, so the VApp for today is called defsec_Juniper SRX_lab. There's another one in there that you don't want, defsec_Juniper SRX. I added a don't use to its name, so you should be able to tell that. The IA lab is being a little bit odd today. So if you go to add VF from catalog, you're not going to actually be able to find it through that. What you need to do is go to the catalogs tab up here, then go to the VF templates tab and search for Juniper. And you should see one right here, Juniper, defsec_Juniper SRX_lab. And then right click and add to my cloud, and then you can deploy it like you normally would. Make sure you do this as soon as possible because it's probably going to take a long time to deploy. And so you want to cut into that as much as possible. Everybody good on that? Anybody need me to like repeat part of this? Yeah.
I don't see the Juniper lab yet.
Uh,
Do not use.
let me see.
Did you have didn't you? Yeah, you went through the wrong one here. Go to catalogs up here. Is that Where's access to the search for Juniper? I tried to copy to see if it would show up. It's too slow.
Anybody else having any issues? Yes. Everybody good? Okay. Okay. So we picked the Ice Age NCDC team over winter break because they had to get started basically as soon as the semester started. So this is our team for Ice Age. They're basically trying to secure a bank in a communist country, which is pretty interesting. You'll hear a lot more about that in like 3 weeks when they get back from the competition. They'll give us a debrief like the Cyberforce people did, and that should be pretty interesting. This is your last chance for CCDC signups. If you want to be on the main team, go to that link, fill out the form. Signups will close tomorrow at 12 p.m. We're scheduling the qualifiers for January 1st. If you had already signed up previously, I sent you an email on Friday. Try to get back to me on that so we can figure out any scheduling issues if they come up. Otherwise, we're going to shoot for the 21st on the qualifiers. And we should hopefully have the team picked before the first mock of the semester. Speaking of mock competitions, the first mock will be on January 27th. That's in about 2 weeks. We're going to introduce Juniper and ESXi, which is what we'll be covering this week and next week. After that, mock 5's on February 18th. We're going to introduce Palo Alto, FreeBSD, and intrusion reports in the intervening time. And then mock 6, March 17th to 18th. We're going to try to simulate the regional and national competitions as best we can. So we're going to have a 2-day competition, 4 hours each day. And we're going to have basically a lot of systems and a lot of complexity. And it should hopefully be as close to the regional competition as you're going to get. So that should be fun. So Mach 4 signups are right there. Sign up as soon as possible. But yeah, on January 27th, we'll try to get teams together probably the end of probably midway through next week. So we can have the main CCDC team on one team together for the mock. I will post these in Slack once I get done here. So, does anybody have any questions about the CCDC signups or the mock? Anything like that? No? Okay, I'll hand it off to Mike and Chase to cover Juniper.
Pretty sure you have HDMI ports.
I do. That's why I like this laptop. Okay. So that should be good. Hi, I'm Chase. A lot of you guys probably know me. I'm here with Mike tonight, and we're going to be talking about Juniper and just kind of giving a little basic overview of what Juniper is, some basic steps you can take to secure it, and just kind of a little tour around the OS. So I know most of you are probably already working on getting the VApp all deployed. Just in case you missed it earlier, there's the VApp you'll want to grab.
So what is Juniper? Juniper's been a pretty large network infrastructure company and producer. I think probably since around the early 90s. Their direct competitors, Cisco and Palo Alto. You'll hear terms from these companies all the time as you continue in your career in InfoSec and network security. It's important to have a wide variety of experience when it comes to equipment so that you're not just a Juniper person or a Cisco person or a Palo Alto, but you have experience everywhere so that you're the most applicable to almost any environment at that point. I think over the course of DevSec, we're going to try and hit, I think, Palo Alto next. I don't know if we'll hit Cisco, but those are the big two we see in competition environments all the time is Juniper and Palo Alto.
Yeah, and as a real-life network admin working on these kinds of equipments, you'll see oftentimes a lot of these things kind of mix. So it's important to have strengths in all of them instead of just limiting yourself to just one.
So what is JunOS? JunOS is the underlying operating system that lives on Juniper hardware. Mainly their EX series, which is switches, and SRX series of firewalls and routers. There's a few other models called like MXs and all that, but the biggest ones you'll see is EX switches and SRX routers. Today's presentation we talk about SRX routers pretty much. And within JunOS, there's 3 areas you really want to focus on.
So whenever you first launch into the OS, you kind of get dropped into this little Unix command line mode. This is built on just top of a FreeBSD distribution. So you can have some basic commands. You can navigate around the file system. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. You have the operational mode. Those of you familiar with Cisco, you can see logs. You can monitor device status. You can see if you wanted to go through and see like, okay, who's trying to log in here, or what kind of usage statistics am I looking at for the device, this is where you'll go. And then configuration is where you're actually going to be living most of your time on the device, where you'll be making your changes. So like I said, whenever you first log into the device with whatever user you log in, you'll land here in the Unix CLI. Most basic Unix commands you can run like ls, echo, a couple more things, but you won't be spending a lot of time here. Most of the time, once you get to this mode, you're going to want to more or less immediately change into either configuration or operational mode. You can take this one.
Yeah. So operational mode. This is probably what you go into right after you enter the CLI. You can't actually do any configuration settings in operational mode. Operational mode is mainly just for monitoring and viewing purposes only. A lot of the times, the commands you'll see revolve around. Let's see. I'll pull this up. The most common commands you will probably see are set and show. There's a few others. Restart. There's ping, traceroute. Things you would do pretty much on a normal system or a normal Linux system almost actually. And then from there you'd probably go into CLI or into.
In a config mode. But you can get back to running commands in operational mode anytime from config mode by typing run. Whenever you're inside a configuration mode, that'll take you back up a layer to operational mode and run that command. So configuration mode, like I said, is where you're going to be living most of your time on the device. Here's where you change your network settings. On the SRX series firewalls, you'll be changing all of your security policies and your security zones here. You'll be implementing firewall rules, adding and dropping interfaces, users. So all the real kind of meat and potatoes of Juniper is done here inside of configuration mode. And here could be a couple tweaks for those of you who are used to working with like traditional Linux systems, Cisco, other varieties of network vendors, is there's a couple little tweaks that Juniper does with their command line. So the first thing is a lot like Linux. Your Juniper CLI is organized into a hierarchy. So you'll start at the top, which is the least specific. You'll be able to do drop into configure, and then once you're in configure, you would pick the specific section you want to configure. So you could go like configure system services SSH. And then once you get down to that level, you can start specifying the individual settings. So like inside of SSH, you could specify what ciphers you want to use, what keys you want to use, which interfaces you want to allow logging in. So if you're looking for something, just remember it's in a hierarchy. You might have to dig a little bit deeper. If you want to see when you're in a hierarchy the subcategories you can go to, you can just type show and then show question mark.
You can type question mark at any time, actually, and it'll show you what your options are. So as you're typing a command and you're deep down, a couple levels into the hierarchy, you can actually put the question mark and it'll show you your sub options later on as well. So it's not just in the beginning when you have nothing typed in the text box. You can actually do it halfway through and see what your options are. And it gives you an idea of what you can set, what you can't set at the time.
Yep, and a lot like Linux too, it has tab complete. So if you're comfortable with tab completing all your sentences, if you find yourself doing it in your sleep, you can do that here too. The other important thing about Juniper is, unlike Cisco, you have to commit all of your settings before they go live on the device. They do not take effect instantly. So let's say you go in and right at the start of the competition, you change your root password, you turn off SSH on the outside interface, you make all these security changes, but you still get owned. And you might wonder why. It's because whenever you want a change to go live on Juniper, you have to commit the change. Usually, you'll want to check your changes before you commit them. So Juniper has a little built-in feature for this. You would type commit check, and then that'll go through. It'll check all of your options that you set and make sure they actually don't break the firewall, basically. You can commit without checking, but I wouldn't recommend it personally. So whenever you do commit check first, let it go through its check until everything's okay, and then commit. One other best practice I would recommend for when you're doing your commits is you can leave comments on your commits. So if you say go in and change the password on the root user, leave a little comment like commit comment, change password on root user. And like we'll talk about later with being able to roll back your changes, that'll be helpful if you make a mistake and you want to go back to an earlier version of your changes.
So yeah, so one of the biggest things you'll notice when you get into even messing around with like your home router, a lot of times there's NAT. And what NAT is, it's network address translation, which allows you to translate from a public IP address or multiple public IP addresses to a private IP address or multiple private IP addresses. Actually, at home, most of the time your ISP only gives you one public IP address, but you have multiple internal IP addresses. So your router runs NAT to convert from one public to multiple private. You'll see at home at least. In many production environments, even when you or businesses where you actually have multiple public IP addresses, a lot of them will actually still use NAT, either to give them more flexibility later on, or if they don't want to use up all their IP space just yet. And there's also some security reasons why you can use NAT as to an abstraction layer almost.
Yep. So specifically with one-to-one NAT, like this diagram kind of shows off here, you have one public IP address, so you would make a request to the inside, and you're translating one external IP to one internal IP. So the firewall would take each one of the requests coming in directed at that external IP, and it would keep a table of each one inside the firewall. So once it goes through the security, it would be routed into that device within the firewall itself.
There's some other setups for NAT as well, right? We talked about how home environments usually have one public to many private, but in most competition environments, you'll notice that it's set up 1-to-1.
So the next thing that's kind of important to remember for Juniper is how firewall rules are set up. So the first thing we're going to talk about are security zones. So security zones in Juniper are your logical containers that you can add like your interfaces to, and then you can block specific things from being able to reach the firewall itself. Keep in mind, this doesn't cover going through the firewall. This just covers being able to access the firewall from the outside. So if you put so they break it down here into, you have your two zones. You have your untrust and your trust. There's other ways of doing this. You can set up as many custom zones and interfaces as you want, but usually what you'll see is you'll see your untrust zone and then your trust zone. Say if you wanted to disable SSH login on your untrust zone, you could set up a rule for that. You would drop the interface that you want into the untrust zone, and then you can allow or disallow specific services as you want. So Juniper in particular really gives you a very granular level of control over what you can set rules on. So this is one way to implement firewall rules in Juniper, at least as far as going to the device itself goes. There's also ways to implement what can pass through the firewall. So if you're on the outside in untrust and say you want to talk to a computer on your inside trust zone, which is going to be the setup for a lot of competitions you'll have, you can set specific rules for what's allowed to pass between zones.
So I guess going into that, like Chase mentioned, security zones are logical units. They contain physical interfaces or virtual interfaces, whatever is prevalent on that device. So usually when you get an SRX, if it's unconfigured, you'll have two security zones, untrust and trust, and they have no interfaces in them. So actually, as an administrator, you'd have to actually, assign an IP address to the interface and apply that interface to a specific security zone. Juniper, right, untrust and trust. In some environments, people will change that. They will name it, WAN and LAN, or they might have a third security zone called DMZ, one internal and then your external. There's many different names for security zones. In most environments, we see untrust and trust as the biggest ones. And then when it comes to security zones, there's two different types of rules. The first one is policy rules. Policy rules are the rules that go from one zone to another zone. So from one interface to another interface, or interfaces to interfaces. It's important to understand that these are where your firewall rules actually exist. And then there's a second rule set called security zone host inbound rules. Host inbound rules apply to the actual interface on the physical firewall device, and it only applies to firewall services. So say that you want to allow ping to go all the way through a router to hit another device. That is a security zone to zone policy. But what if you want to allow actually pinging the firewall or accessing the web interface or SSHing, the firewall? You actually have to enable that on the host inbound rules on that specific security zone. So if you want to allow SSH to your firewall from the internal zone, you would allow it on the host inbound rules for the trust zone interface. Then if you want to allow it on the external, you do it on the untrust zone interface. You would allow HTTP or web management at that point. But to understand that's not allowing HTTP through the whole firewall itself. That would be a zone-to-zone firewall rule. And it's separate because that's not a firewall service you're going through. You're going from a zone-to-zone policy. So zone-to-zone policy, that is just what's going through the firewall. Host inbound rules is allowing that service on the interface of the actual firewall, the service that's provided by the firewall.
So usually, once you get, much like other types of operating systems you'll be working with during these competitions, once you get in, there's still sort of generic workflow you'll want to follow. There's a Juniper checklist in the training docs that you can reference here, but the first thing you'll definitely want to do is change your root password. In Juniper, your default login is root with no password whatsoever, so obviously that's bad. Usually most of the time, if it's pre-configured for a competition environment though, to be able to commit any changes at all in Juniper, you have to set a root password. So if it's in an environment that's been pre-configured, chances are there will be a password, but it will be bad. So the first thing I would do is go in and make sure your root password's changed. And of course, don't forget to commit this. It has no effect unless you commit it. Once you've done that, you'll want to look through, show your configurations, and look for other users that have been put on the box, like just to make sure there's not one called red team or hacking.
Some other backdoor.
Yeah.
Some environments you'll notice if they are right on a domain environment with Windows, they'll have it set up with your domain accounts to actually go in there and allow access to it. Mm-hmm. I don't know have we seen that in competitions yet, and at least in regional national CCC, did they have the domain or Active Directory set up to that? Okay. So it's a possibility, that's for sure. Most production environments will do that if they already have a Windows domain available. Mm-hmm. So some other things you want to do after that, right, and you check for users. One of the things I like to do is disable SSH. Telnet's usually already disabled natively, I think, on most SRX versions now. But you want to disable SSH at least on the external interface, that external untrust zone host inbound interface. You want to disable SSH on there. You also have the option of disabling it on the trust zone or your internal interface. Does anyone know why we would maybe want to disable it on the trust zone interface? That's not where Red Team's at, but why would we want to? Right, like if they compromise the box on the trust zone or in the internal LAN, right, they could then SSH into the firewall, right, and have access. Same thing maybe with the web management interface or Telnet, right, if we allowed it like that. So if they can find a pinhole in, they can then pivot to the firewall.
And then if they get on the firewall, you're going to have a bad time.
So I think that's very much user discretion if you want to disable SSH internally. My opinion always is in competitions, we've always had console access to when we usually time it's Palo, right? So we have.
Yeah, at regionals, they did not give us console access to Palo. We had SSH.
Okay.
But at nationals, they did give us a console.
Okay. So, right, based on your discretion, you can also customize how SSH works there, right, with what users are allowed, or you can even specify what IP addresses are allowed to access it via SSH. So that's something to keep in mind. And then after that, you're going to. Right, so after SSH and Telnet, you're going to want to mess around with your web interface if you want to access that or not. Like Nick said, sometimes you'll only have the web interface, sometimes you'll have SSH. It's an option, what you want to use. I find with Juniper, at least recently working with it, after I do my first couple rules and steps, I want to hop onto the web interface to do maybe some more granular rules, nicer interface, if that's something you want to do. Web interface is usually only allowed via the trust zone, but you can enable it via the untrust zone if you want to.
So to put all that together, we'll go ahead and dive in. Everyone should possibly have the Juniper vApp finished deploying. So we can just run through it then.
Let me go to the next slide, actually. Yep, so we actually have a little diagram of what the vApp looks like, if you guys can get it working, but we'll show it up here too in the vApp environment. Essentially, we show, right, we have, this is kind of like a representation of what you might get in a competition environment where you have your team router with your local zone, your local LAN, and then you're also connected to maybe a core router or whatever's outside that you don't have control over. Typically, you'd put that in your untrust zone. In this situation, we show, right, we're using one-to-one NAT because that's how we've noticed when we've gone to competition. We've been given a device with one-to-one NAT's already been set up. Like we showed here in the vApp, the actual public IP addresses are 10.0.1.0/24, so all those IP addresses are being translated to our internal IP addresses of 192.168.1.0/24. So it's important to keep that in mind. And in this scenario, we have a red team box, so we can test and see if you can access services or not access services on the internal zone there from outside, and then vice versa out. We have a blue team box to go out to see if we can hit anything as well.
So now, with all that being said, now that you know some of the basic procedures, kind of know how the network works, we're going to dive in here. So we're going to look at some basic just CLI usage, navigation, getting to know the file system. We're going to look at changing users and default credentials, going into turning off unneeded services, playing with the web interface a little bit, and then finally adding in and testing some firewall rules. So can I just use the vApp?
Yeah, I turned it on already. The app's available.
So let me go ahead and get logged in here. Okay. Which one is it? Is it?
No, the lab.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so here we are. So here is your.
Zoom in on that maybe, so they can see.
How do I zoom? Doesn't want to zoom.
Strike Control Plus.
Is that better?
Yeah, just Control Plus.
Okay, that should be good.
Can you guys read that? Yeah.
Go all the way.
There we go.
Okay.
That's better. Much better.
So this is the team router, or the team SRX Juniper firewall.
So this is the one we'll be configuring. So as you can see, did we set a password on this one already?
Yep. Yeah, we had to have configuration. Yeah.
So we had to set a password on this one just to be able to log in general, but whenever you get here normally, you won't quite be able to log in. So
In a competition environment, it's already going to be configured to at least some degree. So
yeah.
there will be whatever your default password is that you've been listed on your handout sheet to your team when you got into your environment or prepped on your environment. So it's important to understand that, right? The password they give you on Juniper is compromised almost all the way out of the gate. So that's the first thing you want to change is that root password.
Yep, so here we are. This is the just
The FreeBSD interface.
FreeBSD. Not really much special here you can do, but if we type CLI, we can go ahead and drop into the Juniper command line. So now you see the little arrow there. That means we're in operational mode. So if we wanted to see what commands we can run, we can type question mark. So we can just show.
Notice how we did show and then you added a question mark afterwards. It allows you to have the question mark anytime while you're writing a command to see what's available.
Yep. So if you wanted to look at your configuration, you could do like show configuration, and then that'll run you through just what's here on the box by default. So you can see some basic security settings set up. There's the one-to-one NAT we configured.
So raise of hands, who's this their first time actually looking at like a router configuration through like terminal or CLI? Okay,
A lot of you guys.
So it's not very pretty. It's very bare bones. When we show the web interface, it's a little bit prettier, but it's still a little bit clunky to work with a web interface compared to this.
Yep,
If you're going to be a power user, you're going to be using CLI a lot of the time
Yeah.
if you can.
And it is important to know how to use the CLI too, because a lot of times you won't necessarily have access to the web interface. Sometimes you'll just get this, and this will be all you'll have. So it's important to know how this works, even if you do have alternatives. If you get stuck with this, then it's important to know how to fall back onto it. So what should we look at first?
Maybe go into configuration mode. So to get into configuration mode, you just type configure or whatever you want and auto tab to complete.
So that little bracket, those little brackets there show you the general level you're operating at, the hierarchy. So if we do, just for the sake of examples, configure, or no, edit does the generic category you want to go to. So if we do like edit security, that'll put you in the security tab and it'll update accordingly. So then you can do show here and it'll show you everything that's under specifically security. So if you want to look at a very specific range of things and see values, try to get as specific with your edit commands as you can get. Like if you want to change SSH settings, go down to that level and then show.
Maybe show them how you can go up a level too.
Yep, so you can go, if you want to go up one level, you go up. So then let me get deep real quick just to show an example. If you want to go all the way back to the top, just back to normal edit mode, you just type top. And then that'll take you back to just normal edit. So what should we look at first?
Password.
Users. So the first thing you want to do is you set.
Right, so one of the commands available in configure mode is set.
What's the root command again?
Set should be system service or system root dash authentication.
There we go. And then plain text password. So then that'll prompt you for a password. So you can just, I'll do password on bang.
So you might see when it says plain text, when you select plain text password, why we say that. It's you put it in as plain text, but Juniper will encrypt it. If he were to show right now, right, that's the encrypted password up there, right?
Yep.
There's an option when you actually set the root authentication password, you can do encrypted password. The problem with that is that's expecting you to give it an already pre-encrypted password. So maybe if you had a previous config and you just want to pop over with that already encrypted password, you could do that. However, do not make the mistake of putting in encrypted password if you're not putting already in an encrypted password, right? Like, do not select encrypted password. Do plain text.
Yep. And you can also specify SSH keys right here if you really want to do that, but I can't say I'd recommend that. Well, at least not in competitions. But
if you want to.
Yeah. So if you want
that's
to.
how good you are, I suppose, right?
So, edit system. Let's see. So I want to look at users now. So I would go to edit system login. And then you would set user. Let's just make a user called Chase or DefSec.
So a lot of these commands that Chase is typing here, right, they can be pretty long. The checklist, I think, Cutshaw put into the channel already has a lot of those wrote out, explaining what steps to do already for configuring a specific service or locking down the SRX completely. So you don't always have to remember everything, but
Yep.
it is nice to know.
And remember, if you get part of the way through a command too and you want to figure out how you can complete it as well, you can just type a question mark and it'll show you the possible ways you can complete that command. So here we are, we have the user defsec, so we want to see what we can do for this user. So we would do set and then question mark to see what kind of values we can set. So the first thing we'll need to set for this user is we're going to set authentication, and just like root, you can specify all different kinds of ways you can log in. We're going to set a plain text password here, just do password1 bang. And the next thing we'll want to specify is a class for the user. It will actually not let you commit it unless you specify a class. So if you just want to have a user with normal permissions, you could do operator. If you want to have admin perms on the box, basically a second root user, you could specify super user,
Let's make it a super user. Yeah.
which is what we'll do.
I should have named it Red Team Backdoor or something. But.
Then you can set the UID, you can set the full name, but you don't necessarily need all that. So we are going to check our changes now. So like I said, commit check. So what we did here is we changed the root password and we added a user in. So that'll go through and it'll see it'll succeed.
It's important to know, right? He typed commit check. That doesn't mean it's committed, right? That's just checking if the commit will work or if it meets all its requirements.
Yep, so now to go ahead, we would type commit and then comment. And then you can specify in here what exactly we did.
You can also commit without doing a comment. Sometimes maybe if you're going really fast in the competition, you really need to change that password ASAP. Maybe you don't have to comment immediately, but later on stuff maybe it
Yeah.
might be good so you know what you did then.
Yeah, so it's good to keep documentation. So if you have time, I would definitely recommend committing with a comment. So it'll take a second here. Juniper can take a bit. So then just to test that this worked, we can go back, exit out, and we can log in as our new user. So we can do. So now we're logged in as defsec. So I'll just go ahead and log back in as root here. Okay, so the next thing we can show is how to turn off some of those services we talked about. So we can do edit system services. And under here, if we look at set, here's all the different kinds of services we can manage. So you'll see in here, you can see like FTP, web management, SSH. For now, we'll be interested in SSH. No, edit SSH. And then we can do a show, or no, set question mark to see what we can set. So we can set ciphers, we can set whether or not we want to allow root login, we can set not taking public keys. So just for right now, just to stop anyone from trying to log in as root on SSH, we will do set root login and hit question mark to see what kind of commands you can complete. So we will deny root login via SSH. So once we've done that, we can do a commit check again. And then just do a commit. You'll probably want to do the same thing with your web interface. Up. So if you want to do the same thing with your web interface, you would just do edit web management and do a set question mark. And then here you can do set HTTPS and then interface G001. And then you'll need to give it a system generated certificate. Not ideal, but it'll work for now.
So one thing you notice here, Chase had to actually put in an interface number, right? That, like we said before, correlates to either a physical interface, Ethernet, fiber plugin, or a virtual one as well. And typically, you probably want to look at your config to see what interfaces you have available to you and what zones they're in. So you might look and you see, oh, in security zone trust, my local area, I have GE001, and untrust, I have GE000. So by process elimination, right, you want to, if you're going to enable things for you only, you do it on GE001. You'll notice in Juniper, sometimes it'll either be you do it based on security zone or you do it based on the actual interface. For services like this, you do it based on the interface.
And then just a quick way to see the just list of interfaces that are on the system, you can do a run command. As you remember, run will take you back up to the operational level and let you run debugging commands. So then you can do this run show interfaces terse that'll give you a brief kind of overview of what interfaces you have connected, just a quick overview of status, IP addresses, etc. So we set our web interface to be on GE001, which is that 192.168.1.1 IP. So whenever you go there in a web browser, you should be able to get to your web interface now.
So actually, once he commits that, we can actually try that and show that we can actually access it.
I can commit check. Oops. So now that that's committed, we can pop back to here.
Blue team box, yeah. So, like we said, Blue Team Box, it is on the internal trust zone. So it is on that 192.168.1.0/24 network. Chase here will show, oh geez,
Doesn't want to zoom out. There we go.
him actually showing that he's on that network and going to that to show that we're allowing it.
Come on, Windows.
And then it'll show up from the red box how you can't get in then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we'll
makes sense.
disable SSH next.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay,
I'll do that.
so whenever Windows wants to take its sweet time to finish loading,
I recommend not using Edge.
yeah, don't use Microsoft Edge. Do we have an alternative besides Edge installed?
Internet Explorer. I would use that.
Yeah. Edge does not like Juniper for whatever reason. Is that gonna work?
Try HTTP.
This is box. Do we put Chrome on this box?
No. It's an IP address on there.
There we go. So we'll just log in as defsec. So you log in here with your same user account you would log in through the CLI with.
And you guys will get a little taste of what the Juniper web interface, JWeb interface looks like.
Okay, so this is the web interface. It's nice and pretty because it's the new version of Juniper. So just like in the CLI, you can kind of pop around. You can see your interfaces. It should show some information. You see a much more compact view here than you do in the CLI. So expand these out. It'll tell you which security zone we're in. We'll touch on that. It'll tell you which IP it has. So what do we want to do next? Look at the security.
I guess we can disable SSH real quick.
I already disabled SSH.
Alright, cool. So SSH, right? So we already did that. Then I guess we can go over.
Security policies?
Actually, show the NAT configuration.
Sure.
Real quick.
So that would be static.
So like we explained on this on this SRX, there's one-to-one NAT going on. And if you go to the NAT option, you can see all the configurations that are in place. In Juniper, when you a lot of rules, NAT, security zones, you have to actually give it a rule name or a rule set, and then within a rule set, there's a rule name. In this case, our rule set is R1, and then within that, in the second box below, the actual rule is R1 as well. And it shows our destination address. So anything going to the SRX with the address of it trying to access of 10.0.1.0/24, it will automatically convert and translate that to 192.168.1.1/24, any of those IPs there. And you can get more granular by only allowing certain ports to match to actually translate over. In this case, we allow any because we have some other services running. I think that's good for NAT.
Yeah. Do you want to do security policies through the web interface or through CLI?
Yeah, web interface would be good.
Okay, so let's
We can show
look.
both.
Yeah, so let's look at our security zones here in the web interface. So right now, you can see here in your security zones, we have our trust and untrust that we talked about, and these are both security zones. Here you can see each one's been assigned an interface. So our trust zone is our GE001, which is what we're using to access this web interface. And then trust, or untrust, is our outside interface that faces towards the red team box. So if we, let's see.
Notice how there's the host and mount services like we explained before. Those are the services that are allowed on that interface to be accessed on the physical router. Security zones is actually where your security zone policy is where you'll actually see zone-to-zone firewall rules.
Yep, so if we can look at that real quick, security policy. So while it loads here, you can see from zone and to zone. So whenever you're setting rules in Juniper, you define which zone the traffic is starting in and which zone it's going to. And then you can set controls on that accordingly. So anything that's going from the trust zone also to the trust zone, any source address, any destination address, and any application is being allowed. Now, much like any firewall, you can get granular here, and we can show that off in a bit here with, we can block specific destination addresses, we can block specific services.
Yeah, you'll notice on default SRXs, trust to trust zone will be allow any, and typically trust to untrust will be allow any, but untrust to trust is usually, I think, locked down pretty tight to nothing, including ping.
Yeah, I think if it's not in here like enabled, I believe it's disabled by default, right?
Yep,
So do we want to try creating a security policy here, or do we want to look at host and mount traffic?
we can make a security policy real
Okay,
quick.
so let's go ahead and make a quick security policy here.
So currently, we have a web server on the trust zone that can be accessed from the untrust zone right now. If we wanted to make a rule to block that, we can. Do you want to show that we can access the web server real quick, actually?
Yep, from the outside.
Yeah, so go to the red team box.
So once this box boots up, you'll see that if we were the red team right now, we could get straight through this firewall and hit the web server on the other side. So this is something you don't want to happen during the
You
competition.
want to go back to that real quick?
The blue team box?
Yeah, or the, yep, JPub, yeah. And close out of this.
Okay.
So natively, we're trying to figure out, right, if we can access a web interface from untrust to trust, or access a web page or web server from untrust to trust. So one of the first things you'll do, right, is actually filter out to see your rules that go from untrust to the trust zone.
I don't think we have, do we? We do. So right now, anything from the untrust zone going to the trust zone that matches the HTTP profile that Juniper's created from any source, any destination, and any source identity is being allowed.
Same thing with ping right now. So if we go into the red team box,
Should I pull
Internet Explorer, then it should be 10.0.1.3. Yeah, it's already in there. Okay, so right, we reached the internal web server, showing that our firewall rule is allowing us. So if we were going to go into the back into firewall and deactivate that rule or delete that rule, in this case we should delete that rule so we can
Yep.
rebuild it.
So we'll come back to the web interface and we'll get rid of this one here. We can leave the rule intact. I can change the action to deny. So we're going to switch the policy action from permit to deny. And hit OK.
So in the web interface, it actually does a commit check already. That loading screen does a commit check. And the commit, you have to actually go to the commit tab and click commit,
Yep. You can also hit compare to see exactly what it is you're changing.
and it shows.
So here it'll show you the actual command in the CLI, that it's the section of the CLI, that hierarchy that's going to be modifying. So now we can go ahead and commit this. Okay. So now if we pop back over to our red team box and try to get here again, This is not going to work.
Yep.
There you go.
So notice, right, our firewall rules going from one zone to another are working. So I guess what else we can show from the firewall rule?
You can pop back to the blue team box real quick. What else should we show?
You go through actually making it, maybe.
Sure. So, do we want another untrust trust one?
Yes, we're going to recreate that HTTP allow rule.
Sure. Let me delete it real quick. Okay, so let me delete the old configuration, and we're going to go ahead and rebuild it. So now we'll go ahead and add a new rule here. Give it a so we will set this to permit. Okay, so now we set our source zone here, so coming from untrust and going to trust. So that's our internal network. We will allow any source address and any destination address. And source entities, you don't have to, or identities, you don't have to set that. But so in here, we can search for HTTP.
So application groups is like the actual right service and the related port that it represents that you want to select either allow or reject based on what the rule is doing.
Okay, so can allow HTTP through. So then we'll go ahead and commit again. Okay, so now if we pop back over to our red team box again, let me relaunch that real quick. So now we can come back to the red team box and try again, and it goes right through.
We can also show it through the CLI, I suppose,
Sure.
as well.
So let's pop back over to our console access here. Let me make that bigger again. Okay. Can everyone see that okay? I'll go ahead and relaunch it real quick. Okay, better. So we'll go back to the top, and then we will go to edit. So the first thing we'll look at is our security zones that we talked about. So we will go to edit security zones and do a show here. So just like in the web interface, you can see you have your trust zone where we're allowing through ping and HTTP to get to the web interface. Like I said earlier, this is what you're actually allowing to go to the firewall itself, not actually passing through any zones. So this means that any host on our internal subnet can ping the firewall and can go ahead and get to the web interface. I also noticed you can specify an interface. And in this case, we've bound the GE001 interface to that. And then just like you saw in the web interface, we also have an untrust zone where we're allowing ping through right now. So on the external host, on the external network, they can only ping the firewall. They can't get to SSH, they can't get to web management. So they're just stuck being able to ping. And we see that we've bound gig 0 to that firewall. So now if we go back up real quick, we can go to edit security policies and do a show there. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing the exact same thing that you saw on the web interface, just in a slightly less pretty format. So you can see here the from zone trust to zone trust. We're allowing any source address, any destination address, and any application. So the match is going to talk about what exactly it's matching, and then the then is going to be the actual action that's being taken. So here you can see it's permit. So then we have it set up from trust to untrust. We allow anything out. But then anything coming from the untrust zone, so on the red team network, coming into our inside network, is the only things we're allowing any source address and any destination address again, but the only thing we're allowing in is HTTP and also ping. But we have two separate policies. You can have in every from zone, you can have multiple policies defining which things you want to block or allow.
You can have multiple services also selected within one policy as well.
Yeah.
So if you want to make one policy, depending maybe how you want to organize it, is one policy relating to securing from red team, you want to call it, or something else where you specifically block, certain ports or certain applications that you know that you don't need to allow on your network. You could do that all like multiple services in one policy. I find I like to do one application to one policy, just so it's very clear to me.
And you can get really, really granular in this if you wanted to. We could make another policy in here that it would allow any source address, but it would only accept one web server as the destination address. So Juniper really gives you the opportunity to get very, very granular with your rules and things you want to implement. So take advantage of that during the competition. If there's specific things you want to firewall off, if the competition has specific requirements, be as granular as you can. Make sure you're not leaving your firewall wide open for red team to take advantage of. If you have services that need to get out, allow them out, but definitely don't give them more than they should have.
On that note, though, I will make the point that to be pretty clear, if you fuck up the router, you don't score on anything, right?
Yeah. So
at
be
that
careful.
point, you're not going to score on anything that was internal from there. So you definitely want to be careful. If there's time, right, do only one application rule at a time. Commit and see if you're still scoring, or if you're not. You can always revert back at that point or delete what you set or what you did in there. That's such a good point. We should actually delete a command that was already executed or committed.
Rollback?
Yeah. Well, that's rollback, but actually like deleting what you typed in there. Like, because when you type and you click enter, it puts it into the running config or the config that needs to be committed. So you can delete it from that, right?
Yeah. Well,
Delete.
I usually just leave config and come back in. What's the command for that one? So let's say we have show. Have we actually done anything that can be committed? So I can do, let's say, edit from zone untrust to zone trust policy. So let's do set. So let's say we're going to set that to be deny. So now we want to get rid of that. So we decided, oh, hey, we don't want to deny all access to this. So you would type, what's the command for that?
You can just go all the way up and just do delete with that in front of it. So, right, like you type this command in Juniper, you're allowed to actually, right, you can just go up with your keys and go back to your previous command that you just typed. Say you really mess it up and you don't want that, right?
So
you instead of putting edit, one of your options in configure mode is delete. So instead of set or edit, you can do delete instead to actually delete out that command.
Although if we did it from here, we would delete the entire untrust web policy.
True.
So what you would do, it doesn't like that, edit. So let's go top. What's going on here? Edit security. Trust to zone. No, it's from zone trust to zone untrust. Show. No.
There's untrust and trust, yeah.
Edit from zone untrust to zone trust. So we have then deny. So if you wanted to undo this, you could also do set, what would it be? Policy untrust web, then permit. And that would undo that change. So one way in Juniper to see exactly what you're going to be changing before you commit it is to type show and then pipe that to compare. And in this case, we've changed nothing. So since we just reverted that change, so there's nothing new to commit. But if you made a change and you wanted to see exactly what it is you're committing before you commit it, show and then compare.
So something else I'll mention is that, right, in this scenario, we have an untrust and trust as our two zones. Maybe in an environment, if you really have time, or through the web interface, if it's faster for you, you can always create another zone and maybe add, if you have multiple interfaces you're allowed to touch. add them to there. You know, you can do some more segmentation out through there, which might be nice because, you know, maybe you only want to allow certain rules to certain zones. So maybe you could, if in theory, move all of your services to one zone and allow those, and maybe private computers or private VMs that you don't want on that network, keep it on a separate zone.
So just as an example of that, we can do edit security zones. Let's make this high red team. Wait. Edit security zone.
Security zones.
Security zone high red team.
Set.
Well, edit would just put us in that zone, and then we can add what we want from there. So then I just want to show. So now whenever we go back to show, we can see we have a new security zone here. So then if we wanted to set security zone high red team
Interface maybe.
host inbound interface. So let's say we want to put your external interface on this high red team security zone. If for whatever reason you wanted to put some different controls on that from just your generic untrust zone, you could do interfaces GE000, and that would add that to the zone. So then if you do show again, you can come back down here and you can see that that interface is now a part of that security zone. So then if you wanted to say, have people be able to ping it, you would do edit security zone high red team, and then you could set host inbound traffic, and then you can do set ping, set
System service, I think. Yeah.
system services, and then there's a whole bunch of things you can set here, so we're just going to choose ping. And then if you want to see what you're committing before you do it, you can do show compare, and then you can see all the lines we've added. So then we can do a commit check.
Should fail. Yep. See why it
Yep.
failed?
Because we already have it assigned to a zone. Then we can do delete. So then if we wanted to delete this, we could go back up, and we could do delete security zone high red team. And if we do a show again, that's gone now. So if you did something you want to undo, just delete.
Yep. Juniper SRXs are, I mean, they're cool firewalls and all. I think a lot of people nowadays, at least from my experience, both at DSU and from internships, is that a lot of people go the route of, and this doesn't, I guess, apply to CCDC, so to say, but a lot of them will actually use a Palo Alto as their edge router, and then they'll have a Juniper internal routing set up connected to that, because Palo Altos, you'll find, have a lot better layer 7 filtering and application layer filtering. So a lot of people put that as their edge router, just for more of a security thing, and then have the SRX maybe on internal connected to then your layer 2 network from there. But in competitions, you'll see, at least with the CCDC competition regionally here, we get a Palo Alto firewall, and then we'll have, I think, Juniper layer 2 from inside there, or connected to the Palo Alto. Actually,
Yeah.
I think we're it's off limits, but
Alrighty, do you have anything else?
no, I got
I
nothing
think
else.
that's all I've got.
Are there any questions or anything so far what we went over? I know you guys couldn't really do the commands along with us because of the VApp, but the VApp's always available. It should be there for a while. If you have any questions, you can always ask me or Chase. Nick and Kutch, I'm pretty sure are pretty good at the Palos and the Juniper stuff, so you can always ask them. They probably know more. But any questions so far? Cool. Well,
All right.
thanks.
Thanks, guys.
What's up? Yeah, I thought